Okay. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be studying Jesus being put on trial. Today and Wednesday, we'll talk about the Jewish trials that he will have to endure. Um, the, and I use the term trial and with quotes around it because it really is just it's a mock thing that is just going through the motions to try to soothe their own conscience, if nothing else, about what they're trying to do to Jesus, since they're just continuing to do what they resolved to do some time ago anyway. And then Charles, for the next 2 weeks, the 2nd and the 9th, and the Wednesday nights, will take you through the trials before the Roman officials. So Jesus is undergoing his trials now. We'll also look um, at Peter and his behavior and his actions when confronted with the situation of Jesus being arrested and put on trial, and whether or not he wants to be identified as being part of Jesus's entourage, so to speak. For just a minute, let's bring us up to date, though, as to what Jesus has recently gone through and what Jesus has recently done, so that we get some degree of context as to where we are now. Remember the last time last Sunday, we were really taking up John the 16th chapter, and Jesus was giving his final instruction, his final encouragement to his apostles. And then what we didn't study that Matt will be covering in one of his sermons was what's referred to as the Lord's Prayer. And this is covered in depth, actually it's in John 17. The entire chapter is devoted to that. And that has taken place after Jesus has been in the upper room with his apostles, and he has used the Passover feast celebration as a means of instituting what we refer to as the Lord's Supper, which he has mandated, for lack of any other term, that all believers, his followers, his believers, participate in, even though he would not participate in, he told his apostles, until an appointed time at some time later. Nevertheless, we know that through the apostles' teachings, specifically Apostle Paul especially, that we as Christians are to participate in that Lord's Supper, because as Jesus said, you do this in remembrance of me. And it's very important that we recognize that that's the purpose of participating in that supper. So after while he's in this upper room, remember he gives them the greatest lesson, humility, that anybody could ever see, and in the sense that he washes his disciples' feet. And then there's this impetuous Peter wanting, his entire body washed, etc. But Jesus' real purpose in doing that, of course, was to show what true humility is really about, and what true service is really about. He's also made it clear that, using the term "in a little while," that he's going to go away, then he's going to come back, and in a little while he's going to go away again. But he encouraged them at the same time by telling them that he's not abandoning them, that he is not only going to come and see them again briefly, but when he does finally leave, he's going to provide for them someone who will stay with them forever throughout all their time, and be another. He uses specifically the term another helper, just as he has been a helper to them and a guide to them and a teacher to them. He's going to provide another helper that will come and sort of stand in his place when he does leave. And the purpose of this other helper, which we identify as the Holy Spirit, and is also referred to, of course, as the Spirit of Truth, the Spirit of Jesus, the Spirit of God. He is part of what we refer to as the Godhead or the Trinity, being God, the Holy Spirit. But the purpose of the Holy Spirit, of course, will to be with them and in them, just as He is in the Father and the Father is in Him. The Holy Spirit will be in Him and will be in them. And as long as they remain faithful and remain in Him, ultimately they will receive the ultimate peace that can come from remaining true to God. And what the Holy Spirit is going to do for them is He is going to provide for them the ability to remember everything that Jesus has taught them. Remember, Jesus has been with them for some time, probably 18 or so months, intensely walking with them day by day, teaching them. And since Jesus said He is all truth, that He is the truth, then the Holy Spirit is going to provide to them a means by which they can remember everything that Jesus has taught them. Plus, as John the 16th chapter, I think it's verse 12 says, He will also teach them the things that Jesus didn't teach them because perhaps because of time constraints. Remember, Jesus was only with them, relatively speaking, for a short period of time. But He will teach them the things that they were not able to bear, John 16:12, at the time. And so He makes it clear that He's not going to speak any new truth. He's simply going to tell them the rest of the truth, the things that He could not do while He was here because they were not ready to hear it. He warns the apostles of the persecution and of in fact, He tells them right up front, some of you are going to die. But remember that while they are killing you as though they're giving a good service to God, that they will receive a judgment come upon them because of their error in thinking that the apostles are blaspheming or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, the reward of peace that they will receive because of their remaining in Him. And then Jesus goes to the garden, and He spends probably hours in the garden, outpouring, literally emptying His soul. In my opinion is that John the 17th chapter reveals for us the total humanity of Jesus. He literally pours out His soul. For whom did Jesus pray when He was in the garden? For whom did He pray? John the 17th chapter. Okay, Himself, His followers, specifically, He's talking about His apostles, okay? And then those who would come later, those who would become believers through their word. In other words, those that would become believers because of what the apostles would teach them, okay? So Jesus literally prays for all of humanity. He prays for Himself. And now this is not the first time that he's had this prayer or this discussion with God about what He is to endure. But His prayer for Himself just simply is a speaking from His heart about He has done everything that God had sent Him to do, and that He has taught His apostles, He has taught His messengers, He's taught His disciples everything that He was supposed to teach them while He had time to be with them. And He also prayed that they would remain in Him throughout the rest of their lives. And He also prayed to the Father that the Father remember that as they have loved Him, so the Father will love them. Okay? And so it was literally setting the stage for His final departure from the earth. But for all of us who read it, understanding clearly that Jesus had the best interest of all humanity when he spent His final time in prayer with the Father. And of course, it was that place or that occasion by which the events that Jesus prophesied would happen begin to take form. Remember that when he was in the upper room with his disciples, he prophesied two primary things. He prophesied that Judas would betray him. He also prophesied that Peter would deny him. And now we are entering that point at which we now begin to see that these events are going to start unfolding. So the mob has arrived, knowing that where Jesus was, and the occasion would be that since he was not surrounded, even though he had a few disciples with him, he would not have the large crowd with him to the point where they would have to, undergo an onslaught of confrontation with a large crowd, but it would simply present a situation where they could simply overwhelm him. There is a debate among scholars about whether this Roman entourage was really as large as some people think it was. The Bible doesn't specifically say an amount, other than what we can garner from the original language, which implies that it was a rather large group of Roman soldiers. Could be as many as thousands. A battalion, it's referred to in some translation as a cohort or as a group. The point being is that the Romans obviously knew their problems in the past, trying to get hold of Jesus and his ability to escape from them, wanted to make sure that they had a large enough group of soldiers to where he could not get away from them this time. And so a very large group of Roman soldiers go to the garden, and it also makes it clear that it wasn't just Roman soldiers. There was also another group of people, this large mob, and it literally was a mob, that went to the garden to get hold of Jesus. And so once he was arrested, bound, after Judas betrayed him, he was bound and he was taken, and he's first going to be taken to Annas, the former high priest, and he will be put on trial first by the Jewish leaders. Okay, so that kind of brings us up to date as to where we are. The first stage, the Jewish trials are going to take in about 3 different stages. And we'll look at stage 1 this morning for sure, probably stage 2 also. But since we've been in John for a while, although it's covered in more than one text, in fact, it's covered in all 4 of the gospel accounts, we'll plan ourselves, at least for the immediate time, in John the 18th chapter, and use that as the basis for taking a look at the trials, even though we'll be referring to other parts of the gospel accounts. Any questions or comments yet before we get going? Hopefully everybody's up to date now and knows in context exactly where we are. So in John the 18th chapter, I'm going to read a few verses. Let's read verses 12 through 14 first. Then the detachment, group, cohort, battalion, depending upon what version you're reading, of troops, and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It's either Caiaphas or Caiaphas. You can pronounce it either way, it's correct. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient, which simply means it was convenient, okay, that one man should die for the people. And then down in verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. One of the officers, of course, took this as a smart aleck answer. And so the office stood up and struck Jesus and rebuked him for talking to the high priest that way. Verse 23, Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Verse 24, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now, who was Annas? Well, yes, he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Annas was a former high priest. It says he was referred to as the high priest, but he served as the high priest for AD 6 to about 15. And what happened was, while Annas was serving, he a new Roman official came in and displaced him, replaced him with Caiaphas, who was Annas's father-in-law. Apparently, the new procurator had had some experience with Annas, and Annas wasn't particularly agreeable to cooperating with the new Roman official, so he just simply replaced him. Well, in Jewish law, high priests it's a lifetime position. So the reason that the mob took Jesus to Annas first was probably because the Jewish people still considered him to be the high priest, even though, as far as the Romans were concerned, the Roman officials were concerned, Caiaphas was the high priest at the time. And so that's likely. We're not sure. It doesn't say why they took him to Annas first. There could have been some other reason. Maybe Annas asked to see Jesus. Asked to see Jesus. Maybe they took him to Annas first because they felt like, well, Annas would help them figure out some way to frame Jesus. So we're not told specifically. Nevertheless, he is taken to Annas first. And Annas asks him a few questions that are pointed directly and trying to get some basis for him to say something that was against the Jewish law. Of course, he doesn't. Jesus is a lot smarter than probably they got brains in their little fingers or whatever. So he kind of answers to Annas as sort of as in a rhetorical way, you know what I've, everybody has heard what I've told my disciples. Now, if I've told them anything wrong, then tell me, what was it? And of course, the Roman soldier, of course, took issue with the way he responded to the high priest. And those of us that have been in the military know that it's sort of like a lesser ranked service member smarting off to some commander or some senior NCO or something in that way. Not likely to get struck, because then the official would end up going to trial. But certainly it was done in such a way that would be considered to be disrespectful. And so that's why the Roman official, the Roman officer, took issue with it and struck Jesus. And since Annas couldn't get a kind of response out of Jesus that he wanted to get out of him, he decided, well, let's just take him on to Caiaphas, who Annas knew that, as far as the Romans were considered, was the real high priest. Okay? So in John the 18th chapter, we go to verse 14. John, the 18th chapter, verse 14. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. What's meant by that phrase? What did Caiaphas mean by that phrase? Okay. Um, what was Caiaphas? Do you remember earlier? Do you remember earlier incidents where Caiaphas stated that same thing? What situation was that? Do you remember? Recall back in John the 11th chapter. John the 11th chapter, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, wasn't it Caiaphas who said something about, we better do something about this guy? I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. We better do something about this guy. Why? Because they're all believing in him. And we let this guy go unchecked, we're going to lose our nation because they're all going to become believers. So that's what he meant about the nation perishing. Caiaphas and the rest of the council, the Sanhedrin, were afraid that if they didn't do something with Jesus, they were going to lose control of their nation. And therefore, they would lose their status, they would lose their position, because they'd no longer have a nation of Jews that they would be in charge of. Okay? So that's what it's meant about, we need to take care of one guy before he causes the entire nation to become believers and desert us. John. Mm-hmm. That's right. Specifically in John the 11th chapter, let's turn back there for just a second and see what Caiaphas specifically addressed when he had this concern. And in the 38th, John the 11th chapter, verses 38 through 44, was the situation where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And then look at verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. And then look at verse 48. This is Caiaphas speaking, and gathered there, of course, with all the chief priests, the Pharisees, etc. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So their concern was their own status and their own position. Okay? Yes. Mm-hmm. I'd have to specifically look it up. I don't know that, but considering the time frame of what's taking place in Acts and here, it's likely that they, of course, there was some overlap to their tenure, I suppose. Okay, so this is Caiaphas simply repeating what he had said earlier, and again warning the council that if they don't do something, they're gonna lose their whole nation. Okay. Right. That's right. That's right. And then verse 45 and 48 kind of explains what he meant by that particular phrase. Okay, so Annas has asked him these questions specifically to try to get him to blaspheme in some way, so that they would have a legal means by which to charge him. And of course, Jesus' response to them set off a series of abuse that he was going to, physical abuse that he was going to have to endure. And so he arrives with Caiaphas. Now, how close they lived together. If you look in your book on page 664, it gives kind of what's believed to be a schematic of the location of Annas and Caiaphas's home, since Caiaphas was married to Annas's daughter. It's likely that because they were of the same family, that they would have perhaps even shared somewhat of the same abode or whatever. But that's hasn't been proved. In fact, I think, I don't know if it was in the book or not, or other research that I did revealed that excavations have indicated that perhaps there was some distance from, but nevertheless, they were within the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Annas couldn't say it to Jesus. You're absolutely right. Of course he couldn't, because Jesus hadn't said anything wrong. It was simply the response to it was one of the officers, one of the Roman soldiers, taking issue with the way he spoke, to the high priest. Of course, Annas couldn't say nothing. That's why he said, "All right, I'm done here. Take him to Caiaphas." So, yes, Charles. It is. It's darkness now. Absolutely. Okay. So now he goes to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Now let's turn over to Matthew, the 26th chapter. We're going to be there for a little bit. If you ran off the outline from the website, by the way, for this particular lesson, there's lots of errors in the references here in this particular section. Okay, Matthew, the 26th chapter, verses 57 through 68. We won't read the entire thing, but as we go through the details of this, all of a sudden the editor or the publisher of the outline started putting John 18 down for all the verses. Well, John 18 doesn't have that many verses in it. So they're still talking about Matthew, the 26th chapter. So you can just, on your outline, if you have an outline, just change it to Matthew, the 26th chapter. So now he's with Caiaphas and the entire council. The high priest always is part of the Sanhedrin. And so the entire council has, at least there's been enough of them to have what's called a quorum and be able to make decisions, if not all of them were there. But they gathered together to try to find fault with Jesus in Matthew, the 26th chapter, verse 57, trying to find testimony against him. They were looking for false testimony. Why were they looking for false testimony? Because they knew they couldn't find any real testimony. They knew that there was nothing that was available. Jesus was either smart enough or shrewd enough to say things to where he wasn't violating any Jewish law. Remember, Jesus would not have done that anyway. Being the perfect man that he was, the perfect Jew, he would never say anything or do anything that would violate the Jewish law. Okay? In Mark, the 14th chapter, verse 56, it says that their testimony did not agree or was inconsistent. So no matter how many witnesses they tried to bring up before against Jesus, they were either inconsistent, didn't agree in any sense. Of course, they were false. Now, question: why did the Sanhedrin Why did the Sanhedrin need 2 witnesses? Why not just one? That's right. In the Jewish law, okay, and you can read it in Deuteronomy, the 17th chapter, verse 6, specifically about if you're going to bring a person and they are facing the death sentence, Deuteronomy 17:6, it must be by 2 witnesses. And really, the Jewish law said 2 or 3, okay? But specifically, the minimum number was 2. So the Sanhedrin was very, very careful about not violating their own law so that the people couldn't find fault with them. And so they insisted in trying to find 2 witnesses against him. Also in Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter, verse 15, there is the basis for what Jesus taught about dealing with the sinning brother in Matthew, the 18th chapter, verse 15 through 26, when Jesus said, if you're going to deal with someone who is sinning, make sure you have 2 or 3 witnesses. We use that as part of church discipline. That's the basis or the foundation for church discipline. That if you're going to bring an accusation of improper spiritual conduct, improper behavior, it's got to be by the word of at least 2, better yet 3 witnesses. And that's in Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter, verse 15, when it says if you're going to bring a charge against someone for sinning, you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses in order to substantiate that charge. Okay? So they finally get 2 men to come forward and offer false testimony against Jesus. And what they used as the basis for their testimony was what Jesus said in John 2:19, when he said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. And for them, that was a testimony that indicated that Jesus had violated or had in some way blasphemed God. And so then Caiaphas, of course, as a result of that, of what these 2 witnesses said, urged Jesus to respond to the charges. And what was Jesus' response to those charges? Initially, he remained silent, right? Initially, he remained silent, okay? Matthew, the 26th chapter, verse 63. Then Caiaphas made another attempt. Caiaphas made another attempt and asked Jesus, are you the Christ, the Son of God? Now, while Jesus had the right to remain silent about that too, because why did Jesus have the right under trial to remain silent? Even under the Jewish law. The Jewish law, in fact, the Jewish law is probably the basis for what we get our modern day ruling that you do not have to say anything that might incriminate yourself. But this time, Jesus did say something. Why do you think Jesus said something? And he said, it is as you say, or yes, I am, depending upon what version you're using. Why do you think Jesus spoke up this time? Okay. Knew it was going to happen anyway. I think both those possibilities. I think Jesus. The reason Jesus spoke up this time is because that was Jesus's mission on earth. He was the Son of God, and he made that clear time and time and time again. So Jesus thought it was important. Okay, perhaps because silence might have been working counter to that, because they might have said, "Well, he's not saying anything because he's not the Son of God." He boldly spoke up and said that he was, instead of just pleading the fifth. And so in the 64th verse of Matthew 26, Jesus confirmed that he was the Son of God. What was Caiaphas's response to that? Why did he do that? Well, you think Caiaphas was really that disturbed about Jesus saying that he was the Son of God? Likely, Caiaphas was putting on a big show. It's just, just putting on a big show, because that was the standard for under the custom was that when you were really upset with something, or you were mourning or whatever, you would rent your outer robe, okay, as a sign being upset about the situation. And Caiaphas, of course, was not that terribly upset about the situation, because he got Jesus to do exactly what he wanted him to do. And so after his show, he turned to the council and asked them about their judgment. And of course, they responded that Jesus was to die because he had now blasphemed. And what that then set off was the persecution of Jesus got even worse as the night went on. They blindfolded him, they slapped him, struck him. Most of the versions of the Bible have a footnote that they probably took rods, okay, probably palm tree rods, and struck him with those. And so now the physical abuse becomes certainly more intensified. And then there's an interlude here when we're going to talk about, on Wednesday night, we'll talk about Peter's denial, and then we will finish it up with the third stage of Jesus' Jewish trial. Any final comments now before we break? Our time is up. Okay? Okay, thank you very much for your comments and everything, and we'll pick it up on Wednesday night with John the 18th chapter and Luke the 22nd chapter on the denial of Peter. Okay? Thank you.